Hi, I'm Richard Hartlage. I'm the founding partner of Land Morphology. We are a garden and landscape architecture firm based in Seattle, Washington. So today we're going to talk about how I approach a planting plan. So at this point, we have worked through schematic design, which is the big ideas for the property. It is an urban project with a transitional modern house. And we formed the garden spaces front and back. We've gone through a whole set of programmatic issues with the client. They would like a terrace for entertaining in the front, a fire feature in the back, a dining area, and then a stroll garden and parking access to the garage, which is underneath the house, and then the primary pedestrian entrance to the front of the house. And then additionally in Seattle, we also have to deal with stormwater issues, so we have bioretention planters. So this is the overall plan at 1 to 8, but this is not large enough to do a planting plan. So the front of the property is more simple. And since I don't do the drafting, I start with just colored pencils and put the large forms on the paper first. So we have a pink tree here across the front of the property, and these will actually be Persian ironwoods or Perotia persica. And then immediately in front of the house, we will have the white-flowered crepe myrtle Lagerstromia natchez. The sidewalk is here, street is here. We have connections for guests across the parking strip. This will be underplanted with Liriopes spicata. There's a low retaining wall here. So for fragrance, to punctuate across the streetscape, we'll use Daphne odorata marginata. And so I just put these in by colored pencil, and then with a standard ink pen, I will write the Latin name, the size of the plant at installation, and then the spacing of the plant. So all of that is information that must be captured in order to make a construction drawing. And so again, this is very simple. So the house is here with a terrace immediately adjacent to an entertaining space. So we need privacy. So there will be a hedge here. And we're going to use bay laurels, Laurel nobilis. Those plants will be brought up from California. And so we want those to be fairly sizable at installation. So those will be 25-gallon boxes, which will roughly be 6 feet. And we'll specify those at 4 feet on center. So within a growing season, these will fill in and give the client privacy. This is the south side of the property. And we'll use a different screening plant here, Podocarpus macrophyllus, which is a mild temperate conifer, and those can be lightly shaped into a hedge. And on the north side, we have a very large house to obscure here, so I'm going to use a fastigiate or narrow-growing North American tree, which is liquid ambar styraciflua slender silhouette, which is one of my favorite trees. That is, of course, sweet gum. And we'll plant those at 12 to 14 feet tall, or those would come in at about 1.5 to 2 inch caliper. And we will plant those at 4 feet on center, so very close. And then boxwoods across the front, and then and above the wall for structure in the winter. And then a mass planting of one of my favorite relatively new hydrangeas that came out about 3 years ago, Hydrangea paniculata, and the variety is called Bobo. So it only grows about this tall. It's incredibly floriferous. It produces enough flowers to actually be attractive as a container plant. And so that's how we do. That's the front of the property. The back of the property is more complicated. So we have another terrace here. We will continue the Podocarpus down the south edge and the sweet gums down the north property line. In the back of the property, we have the bioretention planters that will need to be considered. And then the character of the planting plan to reinforce the overall design aesthetic. And so it's a little bit Mediterranean, but not too much. We will want multiple seasons of interest, and we of course want our structural plants, which are a little bit hard to see because I did this yesterday. So again, I would start with the larger plants first, specify where those go, again, size at installation, and the on-center spacing, which we went through a while ago. And then we're going to be doing a grid of magnolias across the back of the property because the house is 3 stories tall, and we want to look down on this and have it be very beautiful. So I am going to use Magnolia stellata and a variety called Royal Star, which will ultimately get 20 to 25 feet. And we're going to plant them pretty close, about 15 feet on center. And so for late March, then that would just be a really beautiful cloud of flowering magnolias, and that will be the first major floral event in the garden for the spring. So we're going to come off of this formal terrace, down a set of stairs. There's a planter across the back of the house. There's dining here. Here's the parking court. Here's the driveway into the garage. And then we have an informal setting here, which is just really to be looked down on and to be used during entertaining, and then into a woodland garden here so the client can put a few chairs in it. So across the top, I'm going to use a very common but very dramatic grass, Carl Forrester, Calamagrostis, which in our climate holds up very well in the winter, and so those would be pruned back in late February, and by this time in April and May, they would already be this big. And then of course they would flower and have the very vertical, beautiful, upright inflorescence all summer long. The one plant that the client asked for was lavender, so we're going to do a mass planting of lavender here on the upper terrace, and then another circle down below so that you get this repetition when they entertain and when they're up on the upper terraces. And I'm using a variety called Provence, which is quite extraordinary. It's actually a French variety that goes back to the 16th century and was used and continues to this day to be used in oil production. So these are plants that are easily available in the trade. And so I keep a master list organized by topic here. This is just used in our office. Do not call us for this. This is proprietary information, and it's got various projects in it and availability from some of the larger growers that we use. And we use Great Plant Picks a lot, which I started when I was director at the Miller Garden, and so that's segregated here along with bioretention planter, acceptable varieties for the city. And so I use this quite extensively. And then often on a larger project, though I didn't on this one, we will then, before I start the planting plan, create a master list and put that into a spreadsheet, and then I'll go through and refine that even further as I develop the planting plan. So this is a very, very, very organized and systematic way to approach this. So again, we have the structural elements, the hedges, the grid of magnolias, and then the bioplanters. So let's fill in the bioplanters. I'm going to use California myrtle because it can take the wet and alternating dry. Those will also be irrigated. So these are designed to take excess stormwater during our wet season and slow the infiltration into our stormwater system here. And so those are predominantly evergreen and will provide screening. And so let's start at the top here. A rare plant that we're going to use on the wall is from Far Reaches Farm, which is a specialty mail order nursery. and there's going to be a planter edge along that stair that's 4 feet wide. I'm going to draw that in, and over here as well, because these walls will be stucco, and these will be bought as 1 quart, and it is a climbing fig, Ficus pumila. You see this in the South and in California, but it is not generally hardy in the Pacific Northwest, and the variety that Far Reaches sells is very hardy here. So I want there to be a beautiful mosaic of this tiny leaf fig that will ultimately cover the walls on this stairwell, so that it's this rich, embracing, wonderful experience to come down to the parking area or into the lower garden. And so when we put these drawings, these hand drawings in CAD, we will actually specify to the landscape contractor where to purchase that plant, because it's not typically available in the trade. Hardy variety, Far Reaches Farm, 1 quart, and those will go in at 2 feet on center, which I abbreviate as OC. So all the information is here for my coworkers to capture and plant up. So as the first plan was at a scale of 1 inch equal 8 feet, this is at 1 inch equal 4 feet. We need the larger scale in order to think in more detail to accomplish the richness of the planting for a project that's this complex. So that's why we blow the plan up and then work from there. And the colors do not necessarily relate to the flower color of the plant. I try to use high contrast so that as the co-workers begin to capture this in the final document, which is a legal contract document, it makes it easy for them to understand. So coming down the stairs, well, I want fragrance in this area, so I'm going to use another plant that is mail order. It's not locally available. It's one of my favorite mock oranges, and this can be purchased at Digging Dog Nursery. It's a nursery in Southern California. It is a very old mock orange that was hybridized by the Limons in France in about 1860. It is Philadelphus Belle Etoile. It is a single mock orange with a beautiful purple thumbprint in the base of the flower, and very fragrant, reminiscent of citrus and vanilla, and it'll just perfume the entire garden when it's in bloom. So those will be the 4 structural plants here. And then this is where it's a little bit Mediterranean, so then I'm also going to use Euphorbia Silver Swan on these sides, which is a white variegated, more Daphne odoratas flanking the stairs, 6 of those, again, for fragrance in February and early March, which is when those bloom for us here. And then a few more structural plants here. I'm going to use Santolina and Cana, and a wonderful variety called Lemon Queen. So that will have silver foliage with very pale yellow flower. In general, all the flowers that I'm using in this scheme are white. There are some blues and a little bit of pale lemon yellow. And then our wonderful friend Stachys byzantinus, which is of course lamb's ear, and there's a fairly new variety that I'm very, very, very fond of. I grow it in my own garden called Silky Fleece. It tends to be a little dwarfer. It's not quite as bright a white, and more importantly, lamb's ears tend to burn out with root rot diseases in the heat of the summer, and this one is very, very disease resistant. And so then flanking the stairs, we'll also use Blue Star Creeper, but I'm going to use the white flowered form of that, which is Pratia, and then mix that with some Eryngium or sea hollies to punctuate through that for midsummer bloom. So there's our summer color along with the lavenders and then the inflorescence or flower heads of the lamb's ear, and then some hellebores for winter structure, and then one of my favorite plants, and I use this a lot in my own garden, Persicaria amplexicaulis, and I'm going to use the white form. That is a knotweed. It is not an invasive species. It gets about 4 feet tall and has a beautiful thin cattail-like flower. But more importantly, it will bloom for a good 4 months, starting in mid-June all the way till frost. And then in the lower area, this has got a very different feel to it, and of course it will ultimately be in shade. So that's always a conundrum. When you are designing a planting that is in full sun at installation, because the trees aren't big enough. Now, we're very lucky in Seattle. We have mild sun and mild climate. So I will choose plants that can start in a full exposure and then convert to shade. And so hellebores are a great candidate for that. I'm going to use another plant, and I'm going to use ivory prince. And then I want some structural plants. So I'm going to use 2 choisias. The chartreuse here is Aztec pearl, and then just the straight species here, just Choisia ternata. I'm not going to use the yellow variety Sundance. So that will give us the separation between the garden and the lower street. Underneath the canopy of the magnolias. And then a white hydrangea that's pretty dwarf, and I grow this in my own garden. It's a double flowered lace cap. So the individual flowers are double, but then it's got that wonderful lace cap, and it is white, and it's called wedding gown. We can buy that locally, and that will get about 3 feet tall. And then it will all be face down with some other woodland plants. I'm going to use Beesia, which has got a beautiful heart-shaped leaf and a little delicate white flower that flowers in April and May. And it's got a little silver veining. So that's for winter structure. And then also for winter, this will be more difficult to find. The landscape contractors hate me when I use it. There's only a couple of sources for it. I'm going to use iris, fetidissima, the stinking iris. You don't really grow it for the flowers. It is an evergreen iris that gets about this big, and then it's the variegated form with a beautiful, simple white margin on the leaf. So that'll be fantastic for the entire growing season, and it's spiky for a contrasting form for the other things that are generally mounding or low growing. And then one of my favorite hostas, which has become locally available. I love the dwarf ones, but they're not always available. We have found a source for one called Gemstone. It's a little hosta about this big, about this tall, and it's a Zaboliana hybrid. So it's slug resistant, and it's a beautiful blue. So that's what all these orange dots are, so we'll plant that in mass. And then also another of my favorite series of new perennials, I'm going to use anemone, and this is a complex hybrid out of England called Ruffled Swan. It has white flowers with a blue back, and it also has a fairly long season of growth as opposed to the Japanese anemones, which bloom late summer, early fall. This will start blooming in May and go through until fall. So that's kind of the general character of this. And so there's something of interest or in flower for the entire growing season. Now, what has not been done here, we'll also do a separate layer for bulbs to capture a high impact in spring and summer. And I like minor bulbs. I use a lot of squills, Psilocyberica. We would use the white flowered form alba in this. And then up here, we'll probably use some of the big alliums, Allium Globemaster or Holland Sensation, maybe some true lilies. I tend to like delicate Turk's cap flowered lilies, not overly blown and big and cabbagey like the very famous Casablanca. I tend to like Lilium speciosum album, or if I want some color in there, Lilium speciosum rubrum, and those bloom late in the season and very, very fragrant. So lastly, we want to frame the driveway so you kind of feel like you're coming in through this elegant tunnel, and we want all of this to be predominantly evergreen. So we're going to use the Aztec pearl. The land is sloping down again, so that's again providing screening over here. And then for flowers in the summer, I'm going to use another hydrangea paniculata, little lime, which gets about this big. And that, of course, is a cousin to limelight, which gets gigantic. So one of the considerations always, always, always when we're designing planting plans for clients is long-term scale so that we do not burden the clients with excessive maintenance. We always look for disease resistance and a size of the plant that is where we want it to be for the growth of the garden. And then another of my favorite evergreen plants is Lonicera pileata. It's very difficult to find in other parts of the country. I sometimes use it when I'm working in the Northeast when we can find it. And it is actually a shrubby honeysuckle that is evergreen. And there's a rockery in here to retain the slope, so I'll use those both above the rockery and below the rockery. And those will eventually cover the rockery so that you don't know that it's in there. And so that's a great plant and commonly available here in the Pacific Northwest. And I'm going to stud it with a Cotoneaster Damerai, not too many, to go over the rockery and down, one called Coralberry, which is widely available. Monrovia grows it. And so that's generally the plan. And so you see it looks like someone threw up on the paper, but it actually is quite organized with all the information that will ultimately be needed for a coworker to turn this into a legal construction document. And we've considered the 4 seasons and the themes of the garden and at what point the client will be using the outdoor spaces and their own individual taste. We often ask the clients, what specific plants would you like to be included in the garden? And this particular client had no general preferences except for the lavender. So thanks for joining us today, and check back in. We'll have more videos for you on very specific themes.